I caught my wife. Cheating after 20 years of love, so I confronted her. The morning sun spilled golden light across the kitchen, where the smell of fresh coffee mingled with the soft hum of our shared life. 20 years of love, built brick by brick, seemed unshakable until the day the cracks revealed themselves. Her name was Claire, and she was my world. We met when I was a struggling artist, painting murals for community centers, and she was an idealistic nurse working night shifts at the local hospital. Our love wasn't a whirlwind, but a slow, steady fire that warmed the corners of our hearts. We built a life together, 2 children, a home filled with laughter, and countless nights spent dreaming of the future. But one evening, everything shifted. I wasn't searching for betrayal. I stumbled upon it like tripping over a loose cobblestone in a familiar street. Her phone buzzed while she was in the shower. Out of habit, I glanced at the screen. The name Elliot appeared, along with a message. I can't stop thinking about last night. When can I see you again? The words hit me like a clenched fist to the gut. My breath caught, my chest tightened, and the room seemed to tilt. I wasn't the jealous type. I trusted her. But trust is a fragile thing, and, in that moment, it shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I spent the next week observing her, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the signs were unmistakable. The sudden care she took with her appearance, the late-night work meetings, the way she seemed more distant, as though she were slipping through my fingers. One evening, after the kids were asleep, I finally confronted her. "Claire," I began, my voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. "Is there something you want to tell me?" She looked up from the book she was pretending to read, her eyes narrowing in confusion, or perhaps guilt. "What are you talking about?" I placed her phone on the coffee table between us, the damning messages displayed like evidence in a trial. "Who is Elliot?" For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. Then she exhaled a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping as if under an invisible weight. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Sorry. The word was a dull knife twisting in my chest. "How long?" I asked, my voice cracking. 6 months, she admitted, her voice barely audible. 6 months. Half a year of secrets and lies. My mind raced, replaying every moment from the past months, searching for signs I'd missed. "Why, Claire?" My voice broke, a mix of anger and sorrow. "After everything we've built, everything we've been through, why?" She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, a cruel irony. "I don't know," she admitted. "I love you, Liam. I do. But somewhere along the way I felt invisible. Like we were just going through the motions. And then Elliot, he noticed me. He made me feel alive again." Her words stung, but they also held a mirror to my own faults. Had I taken her for granted? Had I let the weight of routine suffocate the romance we once had? "I've made mistakes, too," I said after a long silence. "Maybe I stopped showing you how much you mean to me. But Claire, cheating isn't the answer. If you were unhappy, why didn't you tell me?" Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. "I don't." "No, Liam. I was scared. Scared you wouldn't understand. Scared of losing everything." We sat there, 2 broken people in the ruins of what once felt unbreakable. In the weeks that followed, we made a choice to confront the pain, the betrayal, and the cracks in our marriage. Therapy became our lifeline, a space where we could unpack years of unspoken grievances and rediscover the love that had drawn us together. It wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. But we fought for each other, not for the people we were, but for the people we wanted to become. Sometimes love isn't about never faltering. It's about choosing to stay even when the road gets rough. In the end, Claire and I found our way back to each other. Not to the life we had before, but to something new, something stronger. Because love, real love, isn't perfect. It's messy and complicated, but it's worth fighting for. I caught my wife cheating after 20 years of love, so I confronted her. The smell of coffee brewing used to feel like home, a comforting reminder of the life Claire and I built together. 20 years of shared dreams, 2 children, and a house that wore the scars of our growth like badges of honor. But as I sat there that fateful morning, staring at her phone, the smell turned bitter in my nostrils. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. The message was innocuous at first glance. "Miss you already? Can't wait for tomorrow." A casual phrase from a name I didn't recognize. Elliot. My first instinct was disbelief. Claire? My Claire, who laughed at my worst jokes and stayed up with me on sleepless nights. It didn't fit. I didn't confront her right away. Maybe I wanted to convince myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into a stray text. But the gnawing doubt took root and grew, branching into every corner of my mind. The next week, I watched her in ways I hadn't in years, the way she lingered over her phone, smiling faintly at something unseen, the sudden urgency of her work, meetings, the way her hand felt colder when I reached for it at night. By Friday, I couldn't hold it in any longer. She was in the living room, curled up with a glass of wine and her favorite blanket. It could have been any other evening, in our life together. But the weight in my chest told me it wasn't. "Claire," I said, my voice steady but hollow, "we need to talk." She looked up, startled, her eyes meeting mine. "What is it?" "Who is Elliot?" Her face didn't crumble right away. It was a subtle shift. The faint widening of her eyes, the way her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Why, are you asking me that?" she said, her voice too calm, too measured. I pulled my phone from my pocket and handed it to her. On the screen was a photo of her and Elliot at a cafe, laughing, leaning too close. A colleague of mine had sent it, thinking it was harmless, unaware of the chaos it would unleash. She stared at the screen, her face paling. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Claire," I said, the desperation in my voice breaking through. "Tell me the truth." Tears welled in her eyes, and she set the glass down with trembling hands. I didn't mean for you to find out like this." The words hit me like a thunderclap. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't even trying to. "How long?" I asked, my voice raw. 6 months, she whispered. "It's been 6 months." The air seemed to thicken around me. 6 months. Half a year of deceit, while I'd been obliviously holding on to the life I thought we shared. "Why?" The word tore from my throat, full of anger and heartbreak. "Why would you do this to us? To me? To the kids?" She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I don't know, Liam. I don't know. I never stopped loving you, but She stopped, her voice catching. "I felt invisible. Like I didn't matter anymore. And then Elliot, he made me feel like I was worth something again." Her words were a knife to the heart, twisting deeper with every syllable. Invisible? How could she have felt that way? I thought of the dinners I'd cooked, the anniversary trips I'd planned, the nights I'd held her as we drifted off to sleep. Had all of it meant nothing? "I'm sorry you felt that way," I said, my voice trembling. "But you should have told me, Claire. You should have talked to me. Not this." She looked at me then, her face streaked with tears. "I know," she whispered. "I know I should have. I was scared. Scared that you wouldn't understand. That you wouldn't see me the way he did." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of her confession settling over us like a storm cloud. That night, I slept on the couch. Or rather, I didn't sleep at all. My mind replayed every moment of the past 6 months, every smile, every touch, every word. How much of it had been real? How much had been a lie? In the days that followed, we began the painful process of untangling the mess we'd found ourselves in. Therapy became our lifeline, a place where we could say the things we couldn't say to each other in the quiet of our home. Claire ended things with Elliot immediately, cutting off all contact. It was a necessary step, but it didn't erase the hurt. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. But we kept trying. For the kids, for the life we'd built, for the love that, despite everything, still lingered between us. There were days when I wondered if we'd ever make it back to each other. If the wounds were too deep, the scars too permanent. But then there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when I'd see a glimpse of the woman I fell in love with. And I knew she was still there, buried beneath the pain and regret. We're still a work in progress, Claire and I. Some days are harder than others, but we've made a choice to fight for each other, to rebuild what was broken, to rediscover the love that brought us together. I caught my wife cheating after 20 years of love, so I confronted her. The night after Claire confessed, the house was unbearably quiet. I lay on the couch in the living room, staring at the ceiling as shadows from the streetlights danced on the walls. Upstairs, I could hear her soft, muffled sobs. In 20 years, I had never felt farther away from her. The next morning, I woke to the sound of tiny footsteps. Our youngest, Emily, stood over me, clutching her favorite stuffed bunny. She was only 9, her hair a mess of curls, her big brown eyes staring at me with concern. "Daddy," she whispered, "why did you sleep on the couch?" The question hit me like a freight train. How could I explain to a child that the foundation of her world had cracked overnight? "I was just more comfortable down here, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. But even as I said it, I knew she didn't believe me. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. Later that day, our 16-year-old son, Noah, confronted me directly. He was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, when he asked, "What's going on with you and Mom?" I hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Why do you ask?" He put his phone down and fixed me with a serious look. "You two have been weird lately. You're not talking to each other. Mom seems off. Did something happen?" I didn't want to lie, but I also didn't want to burden him with the ugly truth. "Your mom and I are going through a tough time," I said carefully, "but we're working on it." He didn't press me further, but the worry in his eyes was unmistakable. Claire and I agreed to sit down with the kids together that evening. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life. We kept the details vague, framing it as, "Mom and Dad need to work on some things." Emily cried, clinging to Claire as if afraid she might disappear. Noah didn't say much, but his clenched jaw and stiff posture spoke volumes. Afterward, I sat in the backyard alone, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I felt like I'd failed, not just as a husband, but as a father. My children deserved a stable home, a love they could look up to, and now that image was tarnished. The road to healing. Claire and I both knew that saving our marriage wouldn't happen overnight. Therapy became a weekly ritual, a place where we could voice our pain without fear of judgment. One session, I finally let out what I had been holding, inside. "You broke me, Claire," I said, my voice cracking. "You took the one thing I thought I could always trust, and you shattered it. How am I supposed to come back from that?" She didn't look away. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't try to defend herself. "I know I hurt you, Liam, and I hate myself for it. But I'm here because I want to make it right. I want to earn back your trust, no matter how long it takes." The therapist guided us through our pain, helping us confront not only the betrayal, but the years of unspoken resentment and unmet needs that had led us here. I realized I wasn't blameless. While I hadn't cheated, I had allowed our marriage to drift into routine. I had stopped noticing the small things, stopped making her feel special. Claire, in turn, admitted her mistakes. The way she'd bottled up her feelings, turning to someone else instead of facing the cracks in our relationship head-on. But understanding wasn't the same as healing. The long-term aftermath. Months turned into years. Some wounds began to heal, others remained as faint scars, reminders of a chapter we'd both rather forget. The kids adjusted in their own ways. Emily, still too young to fully understand, eventually stopped asking why I had slept on the couch that night. Noah, however, grew quieter, more withdrawn. One day, I found him in the garage, working on his bike. "Do you think you and Mom will ever be the same again?" he asked, not looking up. I crouched down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I don't know if we'll ever be the same," I admitted. "But we're trying to build something new, something better." He nodded slowly, his face thoughtful. "I just want you both to be happy." His words stayed with me. Rediscovering each other. Claire and I started small. We brought back date nights, carving out time for just the two of us. We left love notes on the kitchen counter, small reminders that we still cared. One evening, as we danced in the living room to an old jazz record, she rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Thank you for giving us another chance." It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of anger. But there was also laughter again and shared dreams, and a new appreciation for the bond we'd fought so hard to preserve. One day, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire reached for my hand. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful every day that you stayed," she said. I looked at her, seeing not the woman who had betrayed me. The summer that followed Claire's confession was one of the hardest seasons of my life. The world outside bloomed with life, but inside our house, it felt like winter. Every glance between Claire and me carried the weight of unspoken words, and the children navigated the tension like tightrope walkers, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. Noah. The weight of understanding. Noah had always been mature for his age, but after Claire's confession, it was as if he'd aged overnight. He started coming home later from school, spending hours at the basketball court or at his friend Ethan's house. When I asked him about it, he shrugged. Just needed some space. One night, I found him in his room, headphones on, staring at the ceiling. I knocked, and he waved me in. "Hey," I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "You okay?" He took off his headphones, letting them rest around his neck. "I don't know," he admitted. "I feel like I don't know what to believe anymore. You and Mom always seem so solid. If you guys can fall apart, what chance do the rest of us have?" His words cut deeper than he probably realized. "I know it feels that way," I said. "But love isn't about never making mistakes. It's about how you handle them when they happen. Your mom and we're not perfect, but we're trying to make it right." He nodded, but his expression remained guarded. "I just don't want to end up like you guys. I don't want to hurt someone or get hurt." I wanted to tell him that he wouldn't, that he'd find someone who'd love him unconditionally and forever. But I couldn't make that promise. So instead I said, "The fact that you're thinking about this, that you care, that's what makes you different, Noah. You'll do better because you'll try." He didn't say anything, but the next day, he asked if I wanted to shoot hoops with him. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. Emily. The fragile world of childhood. Emily, on the other hand, tried to pretend nothing had changed. She still ran to me when she scraped her knee, still asked Claire to braid her hair before bed. But every now and then, I'd catch her watching, us with a worried expression, as if waiting for the other shoe to drop. One afternoon, as we colored together at the dining table, she looked up and asked, "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" She shrugged, her crayons still moving across the page. You don't laugh as much anymore. And you don't hug her as much either. The simplicity of her observation broke my heart. I'm not mad, Emily, I said carefully. Mommy and I are just working through some grown-up things, but we both love you and Noah more than anything. That will never change. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, but later that night, I found a drawing she'd left on my pillow. It was of our family, all holding hands, with a big heart in the background. Beneath it, she'd written, I love you. Don't stop loving each other. I stared at that drawing for a long time, tears blurring the lines of her crayon strokes. Claire. The weight of regret. Claire carried her guilt like a second skin. I could see it in the way she avoided my gaze, in the way her smile never quite reached her eyes anymore. One evening, after the kids were asleep, she sat beside me on the couch. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? She asked softly. They don't know everything, I said. But they know enough, she replied. Emily doesn't understand it yet. But Noah, he looks at me differently now, like I'm not the same person I used to be. I didn't have an answer for her. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I hate what I did, Liam, not just because it hurt you, but because it hurt them. I should have been better. I should have been stronger. For the first time in months, I reached for her hand. You're here. You're trying. That's what matters now. Liam. The journey to forgiveness. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't come all at once, like a sudden burst of light. It comes in waves, small, tentative moments that gradually build into something larger. There were times when I thought I couldn't do it. When the memory of her betrayal felt like a weight too heavy to bear. But then I'd see Emily's drawing on the fridge, or Noah's guarded but hopeful expression, and I'd remember why I was fighting for us. One day, as I was cleaning out the garage, I found an old photo album. Flipping through it, I came across a picture of Claire and me on our honeymoon. We were on a beach, laughing as the wind whipped through our hair. I stared at that photo for a long time, trying to reconcile the woman in the picture with the one who had hurt me. And then it hit me. They were the same. She wasn't perfect then, and she wasn't perfect now, but neither was I. I realized that if I wanted to move forward, I had to let go, not of the past, but of the anger that bound me to it. I caught my wife cheating after 20 years of love, so I confronted her expanded version, the journey beyond betrayal, the struggle for normalcy. In the months following Claire's confession, normalcy became a fragile illusion. There were good days, where laughter returned to the dinner table and the kids seemed to forget the tension. But there were also bad days, days when a casual remark could reopen old wounds, and the silence between Claire and me felt suffocating. One of those bad days came unexpectedly during a family trip to the park. Emily was running ahead, her curls bouncing as she chased a butterfly. Noah walked beside me, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Claire lagged a few steps behind, her face shadowed with thought. As we reached the playground, a couple nearby caught my eye. They were laughing, teasing each other as they pushed their toddler on a swing. For a moment, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite name, grief, perhaps, for the innocence we'd lost. Claire must have noticed my change in expression because she touched my arm lightly. Liam, she said softly, are you okay? I wanted to say yes, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned to her and asked, do you think we'll ever have that again? Her face crumpled, and she looked away. I don't know, she admitted, but I want to believe we can. Noah's silent struggle. Noah had always been the stoic one in the family. Even as a child, he rarely cried, preferring to retreat into his thoughts when upset. But after Claire's confession, His silence became more pronounced. One evening, I found him in the garage, tinkering with an old bike he'd found at a yard sale. The radio was playing softly in the background, and the smell of grease and metal filled the air. "Need any help?" I asked, leaning against the door frame. He glanced at me but didn't stop working. "I'm good," he said. I walked over and crouched beside him, watching as he tightened a bolt. "You've been spending a lot of time out here," I said. "It's peaceful," he replied. Then, after a pause, he added, "Out here, I don't have to think so much." His words hung heavy in the air. I hesitated before saying, "You know, it's okay to talk about what you're feeling. You don't have to carry it alone." He looked at me then, his expression conflicted. "What's the point? Talking won't change anything." "Maybe not," I said, "but it might help you make sense of it, and it might help me understand how to support you." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost reluctantly, he murmured, I don't get it. How could she do that? To you? To us?" His voice cracked and my heart broke for him. "I don't have all the answers," I admitted. "But what I do know is that your mom loves you, and so do I. That hasn't changed, and it never will." He nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly. "I just want things to be okay again," he said quietly. "Me too," I said. "Me too." Claire's redemption. Claire threw herself into rebuilding what she had broken. She started volunteering at a local shelter, saying it helped her feel grounded. She also began journaling, filling page after page with thoughts and reflections. One day she showed me an entry she'd written. It was raw and unfiltered, a confession of her guilt and a plea for forgiveness, not just from me, but from herself. "I've realized something," she said as I finished reading. "I can't undo what I did, but I can choose who I want to be moving forward. And I want to be someone you and the kids can be proud of." Her words stayed with me. Emily's. Quiet wisdom. Emily, in her childlike way, often served as an unwitting bridge between Claire and me. One evening, as we were tucking her into bed, she asked, "Can we have a family day tomorrow? Just the four of us?" Claire and I exchanged a glance. "Of course, sweetheart," Claire said, her voice tinged with emotion. The next day, we went to the zoo. Emily chattered excitedly as we walked from exhibit to exhibit, her enthusiasm infectious. Even Noah seemed more relaxed, cracking a rare smile as Emily dragged him toward the penguin enclosure. At the end of the day, as we sat on a bench eating ice cream, Emily leaned her head against my shoulder. "I like it when we're all together," she said sleepily. "So do I," I replied, my gaze meeting Claire's over Emily's head. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The power of choice. Healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when the hurt resurfaced with a vengeance. But over time, those moments became less frequent. One night, as we sat by the fire pit in the backyard, Claire turned to me and said, "Do you ever regret staying?" I thought about her question carefully before answering. There were moments when I wondered if I could do it, if I was strong enough. But no, I don't regret it, because staying meant giving us a chance to grow, and I think we're stronger for it. I caught my wife. Cheating after 20 years of love, so I confronted her expanded. Further, beyond the wounds, toward redemption. Noah's silent catharsis. One Saturday evening, months after our trip to the zoo, I found Noah sitting on the back porch, staring into the twilight. His textbooks lay abandoned on the table beside him, their pages fluttering in the breeze. "You're quiet tonight," I said, sitting down beside him. He didn't look at me, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Do you ever think about leaving, Dad?" The question hit me like a freight train, but I kept my expression calm. "What do you mean?" He fiddled with the hem of his sweatshirt. a habit he'd had since he was little. I mean, wouldn't it have been easier to just walk away? Start over? I took a deep breath, considering how to answer. Maybe it would have been easier, I admitted. But easier doesn't mean better. And it wouldn't have fixed anything. Not for you, not for Emily, not even for me. He finally looked at me, his expression raw. But doesn't it hurt? Being around her? Sometimes, I said honestly. But what hurts more is the idea of giving up on everything we've built. On you and Emily. On her. Forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, Noah. It just gives you a way to live with it. He nodded slowly, as if trying to absorb my words. Then he surprised me by saying, Ethan's parents got divorced last year. He said it was for the best, but I don't think he believes that. I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. Every family has its own story. This is ours, and we're doing our best to write a better ending. For the first time in a long time, he smiled. A small, tentative smile, but a smile nonetheless. Claire's private battle. Claire started seeing a therapist after the fallout. At first, she didn't tell me, slipping out during her lunch breaks and returning with a faintly haunted look in her eyes. When I finally asked her about it, she hesitated before admitting, I needed help figuring out how to fix what I broke, and how to fix myself. One evening, after her session, she sat me down at the kitchen table. She looked nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. There's something I've been wanting to tell you, she said. I braced myself, unsure of what was coming. I realized something in therapy, she continued. When I cheated, it wasn't just about you or our marriage. It was about me. About my insecurities, my fear of not being enough. And that's not an excuse, it's just the truth. Her words struck a chord, resonating with an ache I hadn't fully acknowledged. Why didn't you ever tell me how you felt? I asked, quietly. I didn't know how, she admitted. You were always so steady, so sure of yourself. I thought if I admitted how lost I felt, you'd see me as weak. I reached across the table, taking her hands in mine. Claire, I married you because I love all of you, even the parts that feel broken. But I can't help you if you don't let me in. Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in months, we sat there, holding hands, and let the silence do the talking. Emily's gentle wisdom. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Emily came into the living room with a stack of photo albums. She plopped down beside me on the couch and opened the first one. Look, she said, pointing to a picture of Claire and me on our wedding day. You both look so happy. I smiled wistfully, tracing the edge of the photo. We were. Are you happy now? She asked, her big, curious eyes watching me closely. Her question caught me off guard. Why do you ask, Em? She shrugged, flipping to another page. I just want to make sure. You and Mommy don't fight as much anymore, but sometimes you look sad. I pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. I am happy, sweetie. It's just that being happy doesn't mean everything's perfect. It means we're working on it. She nodded, satisfied with my answer. Then she pointed to another picture. This one's my favorite, she said. It was a candid shot of Claire and me dancing in the kitchen, flour on our faces, laughing like we didn't have a care in the world. It's mine, too, I whispered, my throat tight. A turning point. Months turned into a year, and though the scars remained, they began to fade. We celebrated Noah's high school graduation with a small party in the backyard, string lights twinkling above us as we toasted his achievements. At one point, as I watched Claire laughing with Noah and Emily, I felt a strange sense of peace. The woman who had betrayed me was still there, but so was the woman I'd fallen in love with, the one who sang off-key in the shower, who made pancakes in the shape of animals, who loved fiercely and deeply even when she faltered. That night, as we cleaned up together, I turned to her and said, "I forgive you." She froze, the dish in her hand forgotten. "What?" "I forgive you," I repeated. "Not because it's easy, but because I want to." The confrontation. That night, the house was cloaked in a stillness that felt like the pause before a thunderstorm. I had spent the day unraveling the threads of suspicion, piecing together the fragments that confirmed what I had been too afraid to face. And now, sitting in the dim glow of the living room lamp, I was waiting. When Claire walked through the door, she hesitated, her hand lingering on the doorknob as though she could sense the shift in the atmosphere. She glanced at me, her smile faltering. "Hey," she said softly, setting her bag down by the door. "You're still up?" I didn't answer right away. I just studied her, the way her hair fell over her shoulder, the way she bit her lip nervously when I didn't respond. It was all so familiar, yet suddenly I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "Claire," I began, my voice low but steady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." Her eyes flickered with something. Fear, maybe, or guilt. She crossed the room slowly, sitting down on the edge of the couch opposite me. "What is it?" she asked, though her tone betrayed her. She already knew. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "Are you having an affair?" The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. For a moment I thought she might deny it, that she might laugh it off or feign outrage, but instead she froze, her face pale and stricken. "Liam," she started, her voice trembling. "Just answer me," I said, sharper than I intended. "I need to hear you say it." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Yes." It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't speak. "How long?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "A few months," she admitted. "But it's over now. I ended it." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and foreign. "And that makes it okay? You ended it. So we're supposed to pretend it never happened?" "No," she said quickly, tears streaming down her face. "I know it doesn't. I know I hurt you and I hate myself for it. But I love you, Liam. I love our family. And I want to fix this, if you'll let me." Her words hit me like a tidal wave, a chaotic mix of anger, betrayal, and a sliver of hope that I hated myself for feeling. "Why, Claire?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why would you do this to us?" "To me?" she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "I don't know," she cried. "I was lonely, and I felt invisible, and that's not your fault. It's mine. I was selfish, and I made the worst mistake of my life. But I swear to you, Liam, I never stopped loving you." Her confession was like a knife to the chest. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to throw her words back in her face. But another part of me, the part that had loved her for 2 decades, that had built a life with her, wanted to believe her. "I need time," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I can't just forgive you, Claire. I don't even know if I can look at you right now." She nodded, wiping her tears. "Take all the time you need," she whispered. "I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just, please don't give up on us." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I got up and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there with her guilt and her tears. As I lay awake in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling, I thought about the 20 years we had shared, our wedding day, the birth of our children, the quiet moments that had once felt so unshakable. And I wondered if any of it could survive the storm that had just torn through our lives. The day after. The next morning, I woke to the unfamiliar sight of pale sunlight filtering through the curtains of the guest room. It took a moment for the events of the night before to crash back into my mind, hitting me like a wave. The house was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, staring at the ceiling and trying to piece together what I was supposed to do next. The logical part of my mind told me I needed clarity, a plan. But my emotions were a storm, and every thought felt like a new strike of lightning. Finally, I pulled myself out of bed and made my way to the kitchen. Claire was standing at the counter, pouring cereal into bowls for Emily and Noah. She glanced at me as I walked in, her face a mask of cautious hope, but I couldn't meet her gaze. "Morning, Dad," Emily chirped, her voice bright and unaware of the tension in the air. Noah, on the other hand, was silent. He sat at the table, his eyes darting between me and Claire, sensing that something was wrong but not knowing what. "Morning," I mumbled, grabbing a mug from the cupboard. The coffee maker gurgled as I poured myself a cup, the sound uncomfortably loud in the awkward silence. Claire shifted nervously, her hand brushing against the countertop. "You're up early?" she ventured, her voice hesitant. I didn't respond, taking a sip of my coffee instead. The bitterness was grounding, but only slightly. Noah finally broke the silence. "Are you guys okay?" The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. Claire and I exchanged a glance, a wordless conversation passing between us. "We're fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Noah didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Claire's letter. Later that day, while the kids were at school, I found an envelope on my desk in the study. My name was written on the front in Claire's handwriting. I hesitated, the weight of the letter feeling heavier than it should. Finally, I sat down and opened it. "Dear Liam, I don't know if you'll ever truly understand how sorry I am for what I've done to you. To us. I've been replaying last night in my mind over and over, and every time I feel the weight of your pain more deeply. I can't begin to imagine how much I've hurt you. I know that no words can undo what I've done, but I need you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. This was not your fault. You've been an amazing husband, and I betrayed the trust you gave me. I want you to know that I ended the affair not because I was caught, but because I realized how much I was throwing away. It took me far too long to see it, and for that, I will always carry regret. I love you, Liam. I always have. And I know that's hard to believe right now, but it's the truth. I don't expect you to forgive me. Not today, not tomorrow, maybe not ever. But I will spend every day trying to prove to you that I'm still the woman you fell in love with. Please, if there's even a small part of you that believes we're worth saving, let me fight for us. Love, Claire." I read the letter twice, then a third time, trying to reconcile the woman who had written it with the one who had shattered my heart. It was clear she was desperate to make amends, but the question that burned in my mind was whether I could ever let her. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope, setting it aside. The words lingered in my mind, but I wasn't ready to respond. Confronting the pain. Together. That evening, after the kids were in bed, Claire approached me cautiously. She stood in the doorway of the study, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Did you read it?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I said, not looking up from the book I wasn't actually reading. She stepped into the room, her movements tentative, as though she was afraid of breaking something fragile. "Do you have anything you want to say?" I closed the book and set it aside, leaning back in my chair. "I don't know, Claire. I don't know what to say to you right now. Part of me wants to believe you, but another part feels like I don't even know who you are anymore." She flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know who I am either," she admitted, "but I want to figure it out, with you." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. It was faint, but it was there. I need time, I said again, my voice softer this time. I need space to figure out what I'm feeling. I understand, she said, her voice trembling. Take all the time you need. Just, please, don't shut me out completely. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what that would look like. The rift at the edges of their world. In the days that followed, the space between us was palpable. We navigated around each other carefully, speaking, only when necessary and avoiding anything too personal. A new kind of normal. The weeks continued to unfold, and though there were moments of uncertainty, there was also a new kind of rhythm starting to emerge. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't the way things were before, but it was a new beginning. We learned to talk again, to communicate not just about the big things, the pain, the betrayal, the broken trust, but also the little things, the weather, the kids' school projects, our plans for the weekend. It was small, seemingly insignificant stuff, but it was what we needed. One afternoon, as I walked into the kitchen to find Claire chopping vegetables, the soft sound of the knife against the cutting board felt oddly comforting. She glanced up at me, offering a small smile. "How was your day?" "Busy," I said, leaning against the counter, "but manageable. How about you?" "Same," she replied, her voice light. "Just trying to keep up with everything." We fell into an easy silence, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the weight of the past between us. It wasn't gone. God knows it would take longer than that. But for that brief moment, I felt like we were just two people, trying to figure things out. Emily and Noah's concern. It didn't take long for the kids to notice the changes, though they didn't always understand what was happening beneath the surface. Emily, ever perceptive, was the first to voice her concern. One evening, as we sat together in the living room, Emily turned to Claire. "Mom," she asked, her voice a little hesitant, "are you and Dad? Are you guys okay now?" Claire exchanged a glance with me and then looked back at Emily. "We're getting better, sweetie," she said gently. "It's going to take some time, but we're working on it." Emily didn't seem entirely satisfied, her brow furrowing. "But you're not going to leave, right?" The question hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not going anywhere. Your mom and I are going to be okay." Noah, who had been sitting quietly beside Emily, looked up at me and then at Claire. "It's good that you're trying," he said softly. "I don't want everything to fall apart." I was struck by how much he had absorbed, how much he was processing without fully understanding the depth of it all. But it was clear that our actions, our attempts to heal, were not only for ourselves but also for them. The first step toward forgiveness. It had been nearly 2 months since the confrontation, and though the healing was slow, there were signs of progress. Claire and I began to have conversations about the future, not the immediate future, but a few months or even years down the road. We talked about our dreams, our fears, the things we wanted to experience together. It was in these moments, when we shared our vulnerability, that I felt the most hopeful. One evening after the kids had gone to bed, we sat on the back porch. Again, the night air cool and crisp around us. It had become a place for us to connect, to sit in the silence together or talk about whatever was on our minds. "I've been thinking about what you said that night," I told her, my voice quiet but resolute. "That you want to rebuild things. I want that too. But I also know that it won't happen overnight. I'm not going to be able to just forgive and forget." "I know," Claire said softly, "and I don't expect that. But I want you to know that I'm here, Liam. I'm not giving up on you. On us." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep inside me. "I believe you, and that's a start." Rebuilding trust was the hardest thing to rebuild. I didn't expect it to happen quickly, but I also didn't know how to navigate this new dynamic. Every time Claire stepped out for a meeting, or a lunch with friends, a part of me still tensed, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It wasn't that I didn't trust her. It was the echoes of the past, the scars that still hadn't healed. We started to talk more about the things that scared us, the things we had been too afraid to address in the past. For Claire, it was the fear of being judged for her mistake, the fear of losing me permanently. For me, it was the fear that I would never fully be able to trust her again, that I would carry the weight of that betrayal forever. One evening, we took a walk together after dinner, just the two of us. The sky was tinged with pink and purple as the sun began to set. It was a peaceful moment, but I could feel the tension that still existed between us. "Claire," I began, my voice hesitant, "I think I'm afraid. Afraid that we'll never get back to where we were. Afraid that this will always be part of us." She stopped walking and turned to face me, her eyes soft and understanding. "I understand that fear. I feel it too. But I think that we can find a new kind of love. It won't be the same as before, but it can still be real, and maybe even stronger." Breaking the silence. A new vulnerability. It had been a few months since that night, the one where everything fell apart, and yet every day still felt like a delicate balancing act. We had both learned that healing wasn't linear. Some days we made strides forward, and other days the weight of the past seemed to drag us back. But through it all, we kept moving forward. Together. One evening after dinner, I was sitting in the living room when Claire came in holding a small box. She looked hesitant, almost as if she wasn't sure if it was the right time. "I've been holding on to this," she said softly, holding the box out to me. "I wasn't sure if I should give it to you, or if you were ready. But I think it's time." Curiosity piqued. I took the box from her hands and opened it slowly. Inside was a small silver keychain. It was simple but beautiful, engraved with the words, "Still yours." I looked up at Claire, trying to read the emotion in her eyes. "What's this?" "I've been carrying it around for a while," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Every time I felt like I couldn't do this anymore, I'd look at it. I know it's not much, but I want you to know that I'm still here, and I'm still fighting for us." The weight of her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long I had felt as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure if the ground beneath me would hold. But now, with this small token, I felt a shift. A quiet but powerful reminder that there was still hope. "I'm still here too," I said, my voice catching in my throat. I reached out to take her hand. "We're still here, and we're still fighting." A family retreat. The kids had been watching us with a kind of quiet vigilance for the past few months. They noticed the differences in the way we interacted, the small steps we took toward rebuilding what we had lost. But I knew they were still uncertain. They wanted things to be normal again, just like we did. So we decided to take a family trip, something simple, something to bring us back together as a unit. We rented a small cabin up in the mountains, away from the hustle of everyday life. Just the four of us, with no distractions. The first few days were awkward. The silence at the breakfast table felt thick. Emily kept glancing at me and Claire, probably wondering if we were ever going to talk about it. Noah kept to himself, but I could tell he was listening, absorbing. One morning, after a particularly quiet breakfast, I decided to take a walk with Claire. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs as we stepped outside, the leaves crunching beneath our feet. We walked for a while, side by side without speaking. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It felt familiar in a way, like we were reclaiming our connection, even without words. Finally, Claire spoke. "It's not the same. This new version of us. I'm still trying to figure out who we are, now." I nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Me too, but maybe that's okay. Maybe this is what it's meant to be, An entirely new chapter. It's not about returning to what we were, but finding something else that works. Claire stopped, walking and turned to face me, her eyes earnest. Do you think we can do it? Really do it? I looked at her, searching for the answer within myself. I think we can. If we keep trying. If we're honest with each other, even when it's hard. She reached out and took my hand, and for a moment, everything else fell away. It was just the two of us in this quiet mountain landscape with the weight of the world momentarily lifted. We'll figure it out, she said softly, squeezing my hand. We will, I agreed. A moment of truth. Facing the doubts. A few weeks later, the weight of our journey began to settle into a more familiar rhythm. The trust we were rebuilding was still fragile, but it was there, rooted in the small things we did for each other every day. But, as always, there were moments when the past threatened to rear its head. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the study, staring at the letter Claire had written me months ago. The one where she expressed her regret and desire to make things right. I had kept it tucked away in a drawer, but tonight I felt the urge to read it again. As I reread her words, the emotions I had felt in that moment came rushing back. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, but also the forgiveness that had started to grow within me. It was still there, the hurt, but so was the possibility of something more. Claire entered the room, her footsteps soft. You're reading it again, aren't you? She asked, her voice quiet. I looked up at her, not sure how to answer. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I needed to remind myself where we started. It's not easy, Claire. Some days it feels like I'm holding my breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. I know. I feel it too. As Liam and Claire worked toward rebuilding their fractured relationship, the scars of betrayal still lingered like a shadow over their lives. But not all wounds heal in silence. The pain of betrayal, especially when it cuts so deep, has a way of seeking its own form of retribution. This next chapter dives deeper into the complex emotions surrounding revenge, the delicate balance between seeking justice for past wrongs and risking further destruction. Would Liam seek vengeance, or could he let go of the desire to hurt in return? The stirring of anger. Despite the progress Claire and I had made, there were days when the anger rose again, an unwelcome companion that reminded me of the betrayal I had suffered. There were moments when I would catch myself staring at her quiet laughter with the kids, her hands moving effortlessly as she cleaned the dishes. And I would wonder, how could she have done this to me? It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the lies, the secrets, the feeling that the foundation of our marriage had been a house of cards, waiting to collapse the moment I wasn't looking. Some nights after the kids went to bed, I would lie awake, the dark thoughts swirling, asking myself if I could ever truly forgive her. Could I? Or did the betrayal deserve a price, one I hadn't yet made her pay? I kept telling myself that I was stronger than this, that I could rise above it, but with each passing day, the anger twisted itself deeper into my chest, gnawing at me like a constant ache. I began to feel the pull of revenge, a dangerous idea creeping into my mind. What if there was a way to make her feel the pain I had felt? Would that bring me peace? Or would it only prolong the agony? The temptation of retaliation. It happened one night. Claire had been out for dinner with a friend, and the house felt strangely empty. I was scrolling through my phone when I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. You don't know me, but I know what your wife did to you. My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the screen, the words sinking in. The message continued. I have information about her. You deserve to know the truth. If you want to make her pay, I can help. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, a rush, of adrenaline flooding my veins. My fingers trembled as I typed back. "What do you want from me?" The response came quickly. "Meet me, and I'll show you everything. You'll never have to wonder again." I sat there, staring at the screen, torn. Every part of me wanted to know more, wanted to see the pieces of her betrayal laid bare, to feel justified in my pain. But another part of me recoiled, knowing that this path was dangerous. If I allowed myself to sink into this temptation, there was no telling where it would lead. The confrontation. Within. The days following that message were filled with an undercurrent of tension. I kept replaying the words in my mind. It was so easy to slip into the mindset of someone seeking revenge. After all, Claire had hurt me deeply. She had betrayed the one person who had loved her for so long, and part of me wanted her to feel the same pain. But every time I considered taking that step, I thought of the life we had built, the years of love, the laughter, the promises. Could I really destroy everything just to make her pay for what she had done? Was it worth the cost? One night, after another of our long, quiet conversations, I found myself unable to sleep. I wandered to the back porch, the cool night air soothing my nerves, but the thoughts were still there. Would revenge make it better, or would it break something within me forever? Claire joined me a few moments later, her footsteps light on the wooden deck. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "No," I said quietly, looking out at the darkened sky. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what's happened." She sat beside me, her presence warm and steady. "I know you're still angry. And I know that you're hurt, Liam. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'm here. I'm trying." I turned to look at her, her face soft in the moonlight. The temptation of revenge, of making her feel the same emptiness that had gnawed at me, still lingered in the back of my mind. But as I looked at her, something shifted inside me. This was the woman I had loved for so long, the woman who had once been my partner, my confidant. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice rough with the weight of my emotions. "I don't know if I can ever forget what you did, but I also don't want to destroy everything we've built just to make myself feel better." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't expect you to forgive me right now. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life making up for it if you'll let me." In that moment, I realized that revenge would not bring me peace. It would only deepen the wounds we were both already carrying. As Liam continued grappling with the consequences of Claire's betrayal, a new, darker path began to take shape in his mind. His desire for truth, for justice, and the need to uncover every hidden detail of the affair became more consuming. Revenge, although tempting, was not enough. He needed the full picture, the complete story of what had transpired behind his back. He needed to know the extent of Claire's betrayal, not just for closure, but for the sake of his own peace of mind. The decision to investigate. The message from the unknown person still lingered in Liam's thoughts. The idea of investigating, of learning every detail of Claire's affair, gnawed at him. He had told Claire he would try to forgive her, but forgiveness was a difficult pill to swallow without understanding exactly what had happened. How far had she gone? Was I just one of many? What had she told this person? Each question felt like a splinter lodged deep inside him, causing constant discomfort. One evening, as Claire was out for a short errand, Liam found himself pacing the living room, staring at the phone. The message from the anonymous tipster had been unsettling, but it had also made him think. What did he really want to know? Did he need to know everything? Or would it be better to just move on? The questions piled up, and the answers felt just out of reach. Finally, With a mix of trepidation and determination, Liam decided to meet with the informant. He would uncover the truth, but he would also make sure he was ready for whatever came his way. The meeting with the stranger. Liam met the informant at a dimly lit coffee shop on the outskirts of town, a place where anonymity could be guaranteed. The person was a middle-aged man, dressed in a nondescript jacket, his face partially obscured by a cap. As Liam sat down across from him, the man leaned in slightly, his eyes scanning the room before locking onto Liam's. "You came," the man said, his voice low and steady. Liam nodded, his palms sweating. "I need to know everything. I need the truth. What happened between my wife and the person she was with?" The man smiled faintly, as if the answer were obvious. "You're looking for answers, but I'm afraid the truth is often more than what you're ready to hear. What do you want to know exactly?" Liam clenched his jaw, trying to suppress the flood of emotions bubbling up inside him. "I want to know how far it went. What was going on behind my back? Who was she with? And what did they do?" The man paused for a moment, glancing over his shoulder before he spoke again. "You're sure? This isn't just about closure. This is about something deeper, isn't it? Revenge, maybe?" Liam didn't flinch. He didn't need to be reminded. He was past the point of anger. What he needed was understanding. "Just tell me what you know." The man nodded, then pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket, flipping it open. He slid a photograph across the table, an image of Claire smiling in the arms of another man, laughing as if there were no care in the world. Liam's breath caught in his throat, but he fought to remain composed. "This was taken last month," the man said. "They were having dinner together in a restaurant you both frequented." Liam's eyes scanned the photo. His heart raced. He had known something had been wrong, but seeing it laid bare like this made the betrayal feel so much more real. "Who is he?" Liam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The informant flipped through a few more pages, revealing more pictures, some taken in public places, others more private. "His name's Greg. He's a colleague of your wife. Been working together for a couple of years, mostly outside of the office. He's married too, by the way." Liam's mind reeled. Claire had been seeing someone for months, someone he had never suspected. Greg wasn't just a casual acquaintance. He was a part of Claire's life in a way Liam had never imagined. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, but the truth seemed to sting even more with every new revelation. The shocking revelation. The meeting continued, and with each new detail, the walls around Liam's heart tightened. The affair had been longer than he'd realized, and the intimacy between Claire and Greg went far deeper than he ever expected. But just as Liam was about to ask more questions, the informant handed him another piece of information, something that shook him to his core. "There's one more thing you should know," the informant said, his tone now more serious. "It's not just the affair you need to worry about. Your wife's been hiding more than just this. Greg isn't the only one." Liam's world seemed to freeze. He looked up at the informant, searching his eyes for any sign that this was a sick joke. But the man's face was deadly serious. "Claire's been involved with other people," the informant continued. "I've been following her for a while. Greg wasn't the first nor the last." Liam stood in the quiet of his home, the walls once filled with laughter and love now seeming to close in on him. The truth was out there, raw and undeniable. Claire's betrayals had been uncovered, but the revelation left him in a state of numb disbelief. He had learned so much about her secret life, but he hadn't yet felt the release of justice or closure. There was no relief in just knowing the truth. He needed to act. He needed to plan his revenge. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, the cold, calculated part of him began to surface. The pain was no longer the driving force. The desire for revenge, for justice, had taken its place. For so many years he had been loyal, trusting, and patient with Claire. Now, It was his turn to take control. The seed of revenge. Liam didn't immediately rush into action. Instead, he spent days plotting, thinking through each move with meticulous care. He had learned about the affair with Greg, and he had discovered that Claire's infidelity wasn't limited to just him and her. There had been others. But Liam didn't want to simply hurt her emotionally. He wanted something more. He needed to make her feel the consequences of her actions, to strip away the security she had once taken for granted. As the days passed, Liam's mind raced through countless ideas. He could leave her immediately, file for divorce, and expose her to the world for what she had done. But that would be too simple, too quick. No, this had to be more calculated, more drawn out. He wanted her to understand the depth of the damage she had caused. He wanted her to feel what he had felt, the confusion, the humiliation, the rage. He wanted her to know that this betrayal would cost her. Gathering the pieces. The first step in Liam's plan was simple. He needed to gather more information. The stranger who had given him the photographs and details had been helpful, but Liam needed more. He began to investigate Greg's life. He spent hours researching his work, his personal life, trying to figure out who Greg truly was and what could be used against him. He knew that exposing Greg might hurt Claire in the way she deserved, but he also knew it would serve as a reminder that no one, not even her lovers, would escape unscathed. Liam had his private investigator tail Greg for a while, learning his routines, where he lived, what car he drove, and who he interacted with. Meanwhile, he also dug deeper into Claire's finances. He needed to ensure that whatever he did, he wouldn't just hurt her emotionally, he would dismantle her sense of security. He discovered that Claire had opened a separate bank account. She'd been secretly saving money for months, likely preparing for the day she might leave him. It was small, but it was enough to reveal that she had been planning her escape long before the affair came to light. This, too, would become part of his plan. The slow burn. Once the groundwork was laid, Liam knew the next phase of his plan had to unfold slowly. Revenge wasn't about immediate gratification. It was about dragging the pain out piece by piece until Claire finally saw the full weight of what she had done. The first step was planting seeds of doubt. Liam began to subtly change the way he interacted with her. He was still there, still present, but colder. When she'd ask him how his day had gone, he would respond with short, vague answers. He made it clear that he was no longer emotionally invested in her in the same way. He would leave the house without saying much, coming back hours later, never explaining where he had been. Claire, sensing the shift in his demeanor, started to question his behavior, but Liam was careful not to give anything away. He also began pulling back from their shared social circles. When they went out together, he would take subtle opportunities to highlight her behavior in front of others, casually dropping comments about relationships, loyalty, and trust, making Claire uneasy. He wanted her to feel the eyes of their friends on her, to feel the weight of judgment even though no one was directly accusing her. The confrontation with Greg. The real turning point in Liam's revenge came when he decided to confront Greg. Liam had arranged for a chance meeting in a local bar, a place where Greg often went after work. The moment Greg saw Liam, he immediately recognized him, the tension in his face clear as he tried to play it cool. "Hey, man, what's up?" Greg greeted, though his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Liam leaned in, his voice low, cold. "You've been having a good time, haven't you?" Greg hesitated, a flicker of recognition flashing in his eyes. But Liam was already a step ahead. "I know everything, Greg. Everything. About you and Claire. And I've got more than just this." He flashed a set of photographs, Greg and Claire laughing together, holding hands in public. Greg's face turned pale, but he tried to laugh it off. "Look, man, I'm not the bad guy here." After the dinner party, the aftermath was swift and brutal for Claire. The days that followed felt like an endless stream of conversations, whispered judgments, and confrontations. The public nature of Liam's reveal was something she couldn't escape. Everyone she had once considered a friend, Everyone who had been part of the life they had built together now looked at her through a lens of suspicion and disdain. Claire's desperate attempts at damage control. Claire tried to reach out to Liam immediately after the dinner, her phone ringing constantly with messages, calls, and texts pleading for forgiveness. But Liam had made it clear that he wasn't interested in listening. He wasn't angry anymore. Anger had been replaced by something far colder, a quiet, relentless resolve. She reached out to their friends, attempting to explain her actions, offering excuses and justifications for her behavior, but the damage was done. Her closest friends, people she had trusted, now saw her through a different light. They didn't look at her with sympathy or concern as they had once done in moments of vulnerability. Instead, their expressions were filled with disappointment and betrayal. The most painful of all, however, was when Claire's family found out. Her parents, who had always adored Liam, were devastated. They couldn't fathom how she had betrayed him in such a deeply hurtful way. Their disappointment in her stung worse than anything else. In the weeks that followed, Claire found herself increasingly isolated, cut off from the support system she had once relied on. The end of the illusion. With each passing day, the life Claire had once taken for granted began to unravel. The office where she and Greg had worked together began to buzz with rumors, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She tried to keep a professional face, but it was difficult. Her co-workers couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Some started avoiding her completely, while others openly distanced themselves from her. The affair was no longer just a betrayal to Liam. It had become a public scandal that people couldn't ignore. The man she had once been so close to, Greg, had fallen silent after Liam's confrontation. He didn't return her calls or messages. He, too, had been humiliated by Liam's subtle but effective manipulation. The embarrassment weighed on him heavily. Greg, much like Claire, realized that there were no quick fixes to the situation. Their affair had been exposed for all to see, and their shared secret was now out in the open. It wasn't just the marriage that was destroyed. It was the reputation, the trust, and the illusion of a life they could control. Liam's quiet satisfaction. For Liam, the aftermath was one of eerie calm. He felt a kind of peace he hadn't known in weeks, maybe months. While Claire was being torn apart by the consequences of her actions, Liam had already started to reclaim his life. He was no longer caught in the vortex of anger and confusion that had once overwhelmed him. The revenge, though fulfilling in its execution, didn't bring him the satisfaction he thought it would. He had hurt Claire, exposed her, and ensured that her betrayal would follow her for the rest of her life. But as the days passed, he began to realize that this was not what had truly mattered. What had mattered, what had been crucial, was that Liam had regained control over his own life. He had made a decision, followed through on it, and ensured that he wouldn't live in the shadow of her betrayal any longer. He had taken the power back, not through revenge itself, but through the knowledge that he had made his own choice, not letting Claire's actions define him. The final conversation. A month after the party, Claire, now a shell of the woman she once was, approached Liam one last time. She asked for a meeting, desperately hoping that there could still be some way to salvage whatever remained of their connection. The shame in her eyes was palpable as she sat across from him, no longer the confident, charming woman she had once been. She had been broken down by the weight of her actions. "I don't know what to say," she began, her voice trembling. "I can't take back what I did. I can't undo any of it, Liam. But I want you to know, I was lost. I didn't mean for things to get this far. I didn't know how to fix what was broken between us. And I made terrible choices." Liam met her gaze, his expression unreadable. The hurt was still there, but the fire of vengeance had faded. Now, there was only a quiet sadness, a realization that they were both irrevocably changed. He had planned his revenge, carried it out, and now he was left with the aftermath as well. "You hurt me in a way that words can't describe," Liam replied, his voice steady but distant. "You took something from me. You destroyed trust, not just between us, but in people I cared about. And I'll never forget what you did." As the months passed, Liam's life began to regain a sense of normalcy, though it was a normal that was vastly different from the life he had once known. The process of healing was slow, but it was steady. He had learned the hard way that nothing would ever be the same again. But he found solace in the fact that he could now move forward, unburdened by the lies and the pain Claire had brought into his life. Liam's path to healing. At first, Liam didn't know where to begin. The emotional scars left by Claire's betrayal weren't something that could be easily erased. The thought of a future with someone else seemed distant, almost impossible. Yet, as time went on, he began to realize that healing wasn't just about forgetting. It was about redefining himself and finding new meaning in the life ahead. Liam threw himself into work. He dedicated himself to his career with a focus he hadn't known he was capable of. With each new project, each milestone achieved, Liam regained a sense of control and accomplishment. His co-workers noticed the shift in him, the way he had become a quiet but powerful presence in the office. His leadership grew, his confidence blossomed, and people began to look to him as a source of wisdom. Beyond work, Liam returned to old hobbies he had neglected for years: reading, hiking, photography. These activities had once been a way for him to unwind, but now they became a form of rediscovery. He found solace in nature, in the quiet of his own thoughts, away from the noise of the world. Slowly, the hollow ache that had once consumed him began to fade, replaced by a renewed sense of self. He also began to rebuild his friendships, ones that had been strained by his marriage. The people who had supported him before Claire's betrayal were there for him in ways he hadn't expected. They rallied around him, offering their friendship and their empathy. Slowly, Liam reintroduced himself into their lives, grateful for the unconditional support they offered. Claire's downward spiral. For Claire, the consequences of her actions were far more profound. The betrayal had cost her not only Liam, but everything she had once taken for granted. Her reputation, once carefully curated, now lay in tatters. In the weeks following the dinner party, Claire's attempts to salvage her career failed. Her colleagues, who had once admired her, couldn't look past the scandal that now followed her like a dark cloud. Her affair with Greg had only deepened the rift between Claire and the people she had once trusted. Her friends turned their backs on her one by one, unable to reconcile the image of the woman they had known with the person who had broken a marriage so deeply. Even her family, though they still loved her, began to distance themselves, unsure of how to support her when her own actions had caused so much harm. Her relationship with Greg, which she had once believed would be her escape, was a fleeting illusion. As the months went by, Greg's disinterest grew. He had disappeared from her life, perhaps out of guilt or simply because the affair had been nothing more than a short-lived escape for him as well. Claire's heart ached with the realization that the person she had thought would be her salvation had now vanished from her life, leaving her with nothing but the consequences of her choices. The loneliness weighed on her heavily. Claire found herself retreating into her home more often than not, scrolling through old photos, reminiscing about a time when things had been simpler. But as much as she tried to recapture the past, it was gone. The vibrant woman she had once been seemed to slip further away with each passing day. Claire's attempts to rebuild. With her professional and personal life in tatters, Claire's next move was to try and rebuild. She sought therapy, hoping to make sense of her own actions, but even there, she struggled. Her counselor probed her on her motives, asking hard questions about why she had betrayed Liam and whether she had truly understood the damage she had caused. But Claire found it difficult to come to terms with her own feelings of guilt and regret. The anger and self-loathing she felt were as much a part of her now as the woman who had once been so sure of herself. There were moments when Claire wondered if she could ever rebuild her life. The idea of dating again seemed impossible. How could anyone trust her after what she had done? And the thought of attempting to start over in a new city or career felt overwhelming. But she was determined to make something of herself again, though the road ahead was long and uncertain. One evening, after a particularly hard day at therapy, Claire found herself staring out of her window, reflecting on everything she had lost. She thought about Liam and the way he had moved on, how he had taken control of his life with quiet strength. She had expected him to be devastated forever, but instead he had flourished in the wake of their downfall.